Hey, friend. Welcome back to the Keep Kids Safe podcast. Today's episode is a heavy topic, but such an important one. We're talking about the growing issue of online child sexual exploitation, specifically live streamed abuse and what's being done to stop it. I'm joined by Amanda Vohs, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at International Justice Mission, also known as IJM. In this role, Amanda leads a team of IJM's team of directors who cultivate meaningful partnerships with donors across the country. She lives in Charlotte with her husband and their 4 kids, where they enjoy exploring the mountains, lakes, and beaches of the Carolinas. And Amanda's not just a leader in this fight, she's also a fellow mom. And today she's breaking down what this crime actually looks like, why it's growing, and how we as parents can respond with courage and hope. Amanda says, as you can find the courage in your relationship with God to not look away. If your heart is breaking over something, what does it look like to have the courage to not look away from that and to allow yourself to be brokenhearted and allow yourself to understand what breaks God's heart and why and what he might have for us? I thought that was such a beautiful statement and feeds into the fact that we're going to talk about this today, but we're going to do it in as less icky a way as we possibly can, okay? So welcome to Keep Kids Safe, the podcast that gives Christian parents hope-filled, practical ways to protect kids in today's world. I'm your host, Sarah Panus, a Christian mom, child safety advocate, and content strategist. Twice a month, we shine light on the dangers facing kids today, from online exploitation to trafficking, and equip you with tools to respond with faith, wisdom, and confidence. You'll hear powerful stories, expert insights, and simple tips that help you raise kids who are safe, strong, and supported. And I'm right here learning along with you because protecting our children shouldn't feel overwhelming, and you don't have to do it alone. One note, because of the topics discussed in today's episode, I recommend first listening without your kiddos around, and then you can decide if you'd like them to listen later. Before we get started, let's ground ourselves in truth from the Bible. Proverbs chapter 31, verse 8 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute." And that's exactly what today's episode is about. I think this verse beautifully aligns with IJM's mission and the point of this podcast, which is advocate for the voiceless and the vulnerable, our kids. So let's jump in. Amanda, so excited to have you on the show because for anyone who's followed me, or if you're new listening, you've never heard of me before, I've been a longtime supporter of your organization, of IJM, and the incredible work that you guys do. I donate a portion of all my proceeds for many, many years now to you guys to help raise awareness around the work and important work you do to help kids as well as adults. But today I want to hone in on kids and the work that you do around that. First, tell us more about how children are being sexually exploited online and how IJM helps.
So International Justice Mission works on a number of different types of abuse, trafficking, forced labor, slavery, violence against women and children around the world. As you said, that's both adults and children. Certainly the work that we do with kids is much of what has captured my heart, just as a mom and as somebody who sees just the inherent value and beauty of every single one of our children across the world. So part of what IJM does is work on cases of child sexual abuse, child sex trafficking, and more recently, a new and particularly difficult and complicated crime that is sometimes called OSEC for short, and that is the online sexual exploitation of children. So for many years, we've been working on more of the traditional brothel-based trafficking and traditional in-person abuse. As we've seen some of that same type of abuse and violence move online, we've shifted our work to address that as well.
It's disturbing to think about the expansion in different ways. And obviously, the internet is only going to grow, and access to it continues to grow around the world. When we think about OSEC, online sexual exploitation of children, how old are these kids?
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the things that's been particularly heartbreaking about the crime itself is the victims are particularly young. And sometimes there can be this confusion about what exactly OSEC is are we talking about child pornography or what's the difference? When
Hmm.
we're talking about OSEC, we're actually talking about the directed live stream abuse of these kids. So what we mean by that is paying customers that are primarily in the West, people in America, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe, can wire a little bit of money to actually have access to kids in front of a webcam and be given the power to direct what happens to those kids, like for their own viewing. And so, part of what's so particularly heartbreaking about that, I mean, many things, including the fact that the kids that are victims to this are being abused over and over and over again at the hands of an adult who is in the room with them. And oftentimes, those who are seeking this kind of thing are preferential. So they can like look for a very specific, whether it's a boy or a girl, a certain age, what that child looks like. They're really directing what they're receiving as the customer. So we see much, much younger kids and many more boys being abused in this way than we would see in traditional child sex trafficking.
Is OSEC the same as cyber trafficking? Because those are two terms I've heard. Is that interchangeable?
Yeah, cyber trafficking, that term often gets used, online trafficking. The difference is the idea of it being like live streamed, so live happening directed by the customer. And again, over and over again. Can that material get like recorded and distributed across the web? Yes, that can also happen. When we're talking about OSEC, we're talking specifically about the live streaming.
And from what I've heard, it's kids as young as 2, maybe even
Mhm.
younger. Like, is that kind of what you're seeing? It can go all, all
Yeah.
the way up, but it's like these young kids generally that
Yeah.
are being impacted by this, right?
Yeah, it's often very young kids. It
Mm.
also has some of the other differences about it, or what's kind of unique about OSAC, is these are often kids that are already vulnerable to like the economic kind of societal norms in which they live. They're coming from a place of either like vulnerability or desperation in which family members are being deceived to allow their children to go with a trusted adult to do this kind of thing. So, a kind of typical example would be in a place like the Philippines, which is what we have seen as become really like a hotspot for the supply side of OSEC. So, the demand side is largely the West, the supply side is often places with more poverty. The Philippines is unique in that it's largely English speaking, which is helpful since the customers are largely English speaking, and advanced enough of a country that broadband internet, that access to computers and webcams are pretty widespread. And yet there is no shortage of vulnerable families and vulnerable children living in poverty. Oftentimes, a trusted person is coming alongside a family and offering some sort of opportunity for a job, opportunity to attend school, opportunity to advance in some way. And we will see that mothers and fathers will sometimes allow their child to go with an auntie or a member of the community, a coach, something like that, away from the home to where they can be offered this opportunity. And once the child is removed from their family, that is sometimes where we will see the abuse start to happen. So there is this, it's not typically like a child kidnapped off the street, but there is sort of this deception that is layered into it, that is often through somebody that has some level of trust built within the family unit.
Mm. Oh, it's so heartbreaking. And
Yeah.
then those kids are off with these quote trusted
Hmm.
adults who are obviously just in it for their own financial gain. And so then the kids probably feel like trapped or threatened where they can't speak out or isolated because they're off and away and they can't like communicate with their families. Is that how they get stuck in this?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of what just inherently makes children more vulnerable to begin with. And the younger the child, the more vulnerable they are of even their own ability to understand what is happening, to understand what boundaries are, to understand what their own sort of consent or voice is. And then even if they are equipped with all of that, like the physical ability to be able to remove oneself from a situation like that and get to a place of safety is extremely difficult in these cases, especially when we're looking at young children.
That's why the work you guys do is so important,
Mm,
because this episode really is about what can we do to help safeguard more kids around the world. And I'm curious if you have thoughts or insights around what's driving such a demand for this dark content on the web. Like, why? I mean, I have my thoughts, of course, and you can kind of see
sure.
what's happening with people around the world, but like, why is it increasing versus decreasing, would you say?
Yeah, and I wonder if it's helpful, Sarah, to talk a little bit too about like what works to actually solve something like this and on the supply side, and then what are we seeing on the demand side? So
Yeah,
if it's okay,
please.
I can start a little bit on the supply side and then answer more directly your question on the demand side. When it comes to the supply side of things, like IJM has been working for over 25 years to build systemic solutions that are through the local communities and the local governments to address these kinds of crimes. Everywhere we work, slavery and trafficking is against the law. That's actually like only been true more recently in human history than one might think. Like in our parents' generation, that would not have been true everywhere. That is essentially the case everywhere for our generation. So it's against the law. The issue is whether or not that law is enforced and how that law is enforced and who that law is enforced for in different places. So, what we do at IJM is we do the work of coming alongside the victim. In the Philippines, for example, we've been working for over 20 years, first in this more like brothel based traditional sex trafficking, coming into cities where there have been historically just massive red light districts that are the epicenter for like children on sale for sex out in the open, like not even trying to hide it because it doesn't need to be hidden because nothing is happening to stop it. And it's important work to come alongside the victims in those situations and do the undercover investigations and figure out how to actually conduct a rescue operation in partnership with local police and bring a young girl who is experiencing something horrific like being held in a cell in a brothel out of that situation into safety. Like perhaps some of the most worthy work in the world, right? It is also true that if we stop there, that girl will literally be replaced by the next vulnerable girl before we can get her into an aftercare shelter and before we can get her safe. So there has to be something that stops the revolving door. And what that something is accountability to the people who are committing the crimes. So we also have to do the really hard work of prosecuting the brothel owners, the customers, the pimps, and hold them accountable according to the local laws and actually achieve convictions. And what's been quite phenomenal to see is we don't have to do that to every brothel in the red light district. We simply have to reach this tipping point in which this now becomes a risky crime. It's no longer an easy way to make money, make a lot more money than maybe any other option available. It's now something that like you actually know someone who went to prison for 25 years because he was operating a brothel like that. And all of a sudden, those brothels start to shut down. The use of minors in that industry starts to reduce. So that's what we mean when we talk about addressing like the level of impunity and inserting accountability. Now, IJM can't do all of that. No like outside organization can come in and do all of that work. That is the work of the local government. That is the work of the local justice system. Oftentimes, these are justice systems that have individuals within them who want to see this kind of thing happen and don't have the capacity, don't have the equipping, don't necessarily have the training and the expertise. So it's all about coming alongside the local authorities to set them up with what only they can do and do so like long term and systemically. In the Philippines, for example, we've seen that in three major cities, Cebu and Pampanga and Manila. And after years of that work, of pulling girls out of that situation, getting them to safety, of prosecuting the perpetrators, of building capacity in the justice systems, in as short as something like 4 to 7 years, we have seen the rate of minors available for sex drop by as high as 79 to 86% in those three mega cities.
Wow. Incredible. Incredible.
And part of what's awesome about that, Sarah, is that's not like IJM reporting that. That is external validators coming alongside and conducting pretty rigorous measurement to understand what it looked like before and what it looked like afterwards. So what's so encouraging about that is like there is a solution. This doesn't have to stay this way. And it could be this way in lots of other places had this kind of work not been implemented. So I find just like deep hope in knowing that there is actually a solution available. We don't have to just like wallow in the brokenness of it all, like, which is really tempting to do. And we have to sort of be diligent about that. But we can instead focus on like the hope and the light and the solution and what our role in it can be. And it's real, it's doable. It's just not easy.
Yeah, I could see then if they were cracking down on the in-person, does that then open the door for them to try to think of other ways, and which is why the online sector of is growing, would you say?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question and something that we've looked at closely. The online sector is also a lot more complicated to address because it requires like cross-border jurisdictions working together, like where the customer is in a totally different set of laws than where the perp is versus where the victim is. Money is being wired across borders. Everything about it is more complicated. And when we first started to see that this was happening, we were focused exclusively on the like brick and mortar brothel based traditional sex trafficking. And you can imagine, Sarah, that there was some sense of like, there's no way. Like, what could we possibly do to address all of that? It is so much more difficult. It is so much more complicated, but then also just left with this sense of like, but how could we not? And once you're brought face to face with that reality, there is a bit of a reckoning of sort of who we are and what we stand for. And I just give all the credit in the world to our team in the Philippines. So all of our work in this is led by like nationals in the countries in which we work. And we have a team of lawyers and social workers and prosecutors, Filipino leaders in the Philippines that are some of the most courageous and oddly joyful people that you will ever meet. And they led the organization to see that this was something that we had to be a part of.
That's beautiful. Well, maybe they're joyful because they're just filled with the Holy Spirit, right? And they're
I
connecting
think
in with that and
so.
like their purpose. I mean, this is
Absolutely.
purpose-driven work that everybody is doing. And obviously you're talking about the Philippines being the epicenter, but this happens all over the world,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great background. Thank you. Let's talk action steps. It can feel very daunting for us as parents as we think about this. I remember that was my feeling years and years ago where I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I want to
Mm-hmm.
help in this area of child trafficking and online exploitation, but I just didn't know how, which is why I really was so happy when I found IJM and
Yeah.
could support you guys because you guys had the systems and the people and I could just like donate and you guys could help, do the
Yeah.
great work that you're doing. For the parents that are
Mm-hmm.
listening, what's one thing, or you can list more than one, but what's
Yeah.
one thing that we can do to help? So if we're listening to this and we're like, this is terrible, how do we help you
Mm-hmm.
guys do the important work that you do? What should we
Mm.
be thinking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sarah, it's such a good question, and one that I have been talking to God about for the last 10 years or so, since I've
Mm,
sort of uprooted my life personally and my family's life to engage more directly in this kind of work. I think the response that I'm sitting with right now is kind of two parts. One that's sort of like external and out there, and one that's sort of like internal and in here and my family and my circle. And we can get into more of that because I think for me personally, that is a growing part of the answer is it's like, well, who we are and how we live and how we love and how we teach and guide our children. But externally, when we look at sort of like the very clear like horror that is happening in the world, I would say number one, like as you can, find the courage in your relationship with God to like not just look away. And I think that's getting increasingly hard in our social media world where we are just being like pummeled with negative clickbait at every turn. And I'm not suggesting that we just stay in that cycle in an unproductive and an unhelpful way, but in sort of a deeper, more authentic and more holistic way. Like, if your heart is breaking over something, what does it look like to have the courage to not look away from that and to allow yourself to be brokenhearted and allow yourself to understand what breaks God's heart and why and what he might have for us in that, what our role in that might be. That's maybe a little higher level than you have in mind, but I think in a big picture sense, that's one thing. Very tangibly within that, Sarah, like there are people in the kingdom that are dedicating their lives to this kind of work, that have gone to law school, that have gained the professional experience, that are working on this day in and day out, year after year after year, serving people that will never pay them a dime, right? That will never be in a position to buy the kind of services that they so desperately need. So I do think there is a very like real and tangible way that when those of us that have means are able to equip the people who are giving their lives to this work with the tangible resources that are necessary to go out and do this work every day. Like that is part of how we can, like sitting in our living rooms in North Carolina or Minnesota or wherever we are, can like be a part of the coming together of the kingdom to do this work. And one of the things I've so loved about being a part of IJM is getting a front row seat to how God appears to do his work in the world, which doesn't seem to be the magic wand that he could theoretically wave and end this all, but instead appears, from what I can understand of his wisdom, to be like drawing each of us in our very, very unique ways, in our very unique journeys that is really just between each of us and God, to what our part in this world is. And I've gotten to see the way that he has brought a public prosecutor from Scotland to dedicate her life to this kind of work, or a donor family in Minnesota who decides that they're going to put on a swim meet every year and rally their communities and raise $25,000 so that that public prosecutor has the resources she needs to show up in court another day. So it's just this beautiful like tapestry of each of us having a really, really different role to play. But when we each say yes to like whatever our little piece is, that's when God's miracles in the world happen. And man, getting to be a part of that, like, I just kind of think that's the whole journey.
That's beautiful. Finding that courage with God to not look away is so
Yeah.
powerful. And it's a huge, huge reason why I've started this podcast, because
Mm,
I have felt so called for so many years to help. And now at this point, I feel so called to help expand awareness even more
mm-hmm,
around this topic.
mm-hmm,
For
mm-hmm.
those of us who are Christian parents, we
Yeah.
want to do good by our own kids. We want to help the
Right.
world, but then
Right.
we just
Right.
can feel overwhelmed. And that is feedback I hear as I talk with other moms,
Right.
especially, is they're like, "Oh, it's such an important topic, but gosh, it's just so hard to think about, you know?"
Mm-hmm. It
And
is. Yeah.
we as Christians need to stand up for what's morally right
Right.
to help in any way we can. And so
Yeah.
it can feel so overwhelming and so big, but to your point, I mean, there's so many little things we can do that if
Yeah.
collectively we're all doing something, it's going to help look that evil in the face and say, this is not okay, this is not
Yeah.
accepted, and we're going to do something about it. If people are able to give, I'm going to drop a link in the episode description here and in the show notes. I have a link that I do my donations through, and if anyone wants to group together with mine, you can just donate to that. 100% of everything that you donate will go right to IJM to fund all this incredible work that they do. So I will put that in the description here so that people can just easily click on it. I know with the economy, it's tough, and a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have a lot of extra funds. I mean, even if it's $5, I mean, if it's like, hey, instead of getting this, coffee out today, I'm going to take that money and just donate it. That's something simple you can do as well. So every bit will help and will add up if we all are doing something.
Yeah, that's so real, Sarah. And thank you so much for just your perspective and your posture on that. And my hope would be just for the people who choose to lean in and be a part of it, that you can just then experience sort of the depth of being a part of the solution, right? And being a part
Yeah.
of like building the world that we want to create for ourselves and for our kids, because the world is the way it is because of us, because of people, because of humanity,
Hmm.
and because of all of the little choices that we make. So I think there can
Yes.
be a lot of joy in choosing to lean in and be a part of whatever it is you want to create. The final word I would say on this topic would be, if there's something about this that is making you feel like uncomfortable or unsettled, I would just encourage you to like see that as an opportunity. And it has been such a lesson for me that wherever like I am like feeling restless, that's the invitation and that's the opportunity. And incredible things can happen when we just take a step in that direction, to understand what that is and to start to unpack that. And it doesn't like happen all at once, and it doesn't happen overnight, but just like one foot in front of the other, right? Like the obedience to leaning into whatever it is that God might be like wrestling in your soul.
Hmm.
And I think that leads to a life well lived.
It's powerful. Okay, so what's the best way for people to connect with you and IJM online?
Yeah, IJM.org. You will find all kinds of resources there, specific to our work, specific to how you can get involved. You can find my page on there as well as on Instagram, just Amanda Vohs.
Appreciate those action steps of finding that courage to not look away, to follow what's in your heart of how we can help. And then also, if you have the means or just can help spread awareness around donating to help all those people who are dedicating their lives to doing this crucial work and just helping them be well equipped to keep doing more of it. I know today's topic was tough, but it's so important. If your heart feels heavy, let it also feel hopeful. God is still at work through people like Amanda, through IJM, and even through you. Ask Him what your role might be. Whether it's sharing this episode, praying, or giving what you can, every act of faith matters. I'll drop the IJM donation link into the show notes if you feel led to support their mission. And we'll hear from Amanda again a couple episodes from now, where I invited her to come back and share what she does to protect her own 4 kids here at home. You won't want to miss that one. Sign up for email updates to get info on when new episodes drop at the link in this episode's description. Until then, stay rooted in truth and keep going. You've got this. God bless.